Welcome to the Woman's Connection. I'm Barrie-Louise Switzen, your moderator. The Woman's Connection is a program about events shaping women's lives and helping one gain authentic power on a personal or professional level. So won't you stay tuned?
Welcome. We're here again with Susun Weed, and I got to tell you, we're in store for a rousing show. We're going to talk about one of her other books called What's Up Down There? And it's reproductive, it's sex, it's whatever you want it to be. And I'd like to welcome Susun Weed. Susun!
Barrie, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for letting me talk about sex. Some people have said, oh, this is a family show, we can't talk about sex. And I say, no sex, no families.
Well, let's just back up a second. You wrote a book called Down There, Sexual and Reproductive Health.
The Wise Woman Way.
The Wise Woman Way. What made you write the book?
Oh, well, truthfully, what made me write the book was that I had promised a book called For Women Who Love Their Breasts and Uterus and Don't Want to Lose Them.
Okay.
So I had proposed that I would write a book to help women retain their breasts and retain their uteruses, which are being cut off at an alarming rate in the United States and throughout Europe as well. And I got started writing about breasts, and it turned into an over 300-page book. And so I said, I am so sorry, but there's not room to squeeze a uterus in here. We're just going to have to go with breasts, but I promise you uteruses. So, well, of course, the uterus does not stand alone.
So you have everything else.
So we have everything else. And I'll tell you one of my favorite parts about this book, Barrie, is that each one of the organs gets to speak for themselves.
All right.
They actually talk to us. Like the bladder says, it all goes round and round, but it comes down to me.
All right, let's talk about good health for the bladder.
Let's talk about good health for the bladder, because as women age, incontinence becomes more of a problem.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, for the past 15 years, adult diapers have outsold baby diapers in the United States.
That's pretty sad.
And that will only be an increasing thing. And that goes all the way from little panty liners to outright diapers. What's going on? Well, what's going on basically, Barrie, is a design flaw.
A design flaw in the system.
A design
in our bodies.
Yeah.
Okay.
Think about like a dog or a cat. Where's the pelvic floor? The pelvic floor is in this direction to gravity, right? Because they're standing on 4 legs. So here's the pelvic floor here. Now we're standing on 2 legs, so now the pelvic floor is here, right? And all of the organs are pressing down on it. It's not designed to hold all of the organs up. And not only that, look at how we're sitting in chairs. Isn't this wonderful? Not. Because when you sit in a chair, it relaxes the pelvic floor.
Oh, interesting.
Right? The vast majority of people in the world, right, sit in a squatting posture, right?
That's
true. When you see them, they're sitting, not in a chair, of course, but they're sitting like this. And you can feel now that the pelvic floor is engaged. It now becomes active. It now has something to do. Right? So this keeps the pelvic floor strong. But because we sit in chairs in our culture, the pelvic floor weakens. Now, Dr. Kegel started thinking about this, and he started talking to women about exercising the pelvic floor, and they're called Kegel exercises. And women started saying to him, oh, Dr. Kegel, these exercises are really helping my incontinence, but they're having a side effect. Have you heard about the side effect from doing these exercises?
No, but I can only imagine.
Very much increased sensation during orgasm. So you must be aware that if you strengthen your pelvic floor, good things will happen. And I talked to some worldwide experts about pelvic floor and pelvic floor exercises. Feminists, because they don't like to call things after men, call these pelvic clenches. Right, okay. And the great thing about pelvic clenches is you can do them anytime. Nobody knows. And I give you specific examples of how to do these exercises. And some women have found just that alone is tremendous value in helping to deal with incontinence. This is a big book, and there's a lot of different organs and problems here. So I thought, how am I going to make this more accessible for people? And what I did was I put a help box in each chapter. So, help, I have an overactive bladder. And right there, it says, use a visualization, do your Kegels every day, keep avoiding diarrhea, and you can retrain your bladder with biofeedback, and drink a quart or more of comfrey leaf infusion each week to strengthen the bladder. So certainly the book goes on and on for pages about many other things that you can do. And again, remember, we're working with the 7 medicines. We're working with Serenity Medicine, Story Medicine, we're working with mind medicine, lifestyle medicine, alternative medicine, pharmaceutical medicine, and high-tech medicine. So we look at all of the possibilities there. We look at supplements, we look at drugs and some of the real problems with those, and we look at the enormous problems that are cropping up about the surgery that women have been encouraged to have for incontinence. As a matter of fact, at this point, the FDA is recalling some of the material that has been used because they're replacing that slack pelvic floor with a nylon mesh.
But I can't even fathom this.
Yes. Well, they're telling women that well, you can only do so much to strengthen that muscle yourself, and so we're just going to replace it with this nice synthetic material. But that synthetic material is actually extruding through the abdominal wall, and we won't go into the gory details of it. But again, if you're interested in that, my books cover the entire gamut. They're not just herbals. Of course, I am an herbalist. I love herbs. I want you to use herbs. I think herbs are definitely a best bet. But if you're interested in the drugs or surgery, I'm going to cover that too and tell you what could work for you and what you really need to watch out for, where there's going to be some real problems.
All right, so let's just say if you have incontinence, you start with a Kegel.
Your Kegel exercises.
Exercises. Right. You do an infusion.
So you do comfrey leaf infusion to strengthen that tissue.
All right, and then that'll help with your bladder.
That will help. It's the sphincter to the bladder, right? The bladder is fine, but that sphincter, which is part of the pelvic floor, can get loose, and then when you cough or when you sneeze or when you lift something heavy, you could leak, or some women have urge incontinence, which is they're fine until they're not fine. Right?
I shouldn't laugh. It's
right. Well,
it's serious.
It is serious, but it is also kind of funny. I mean, I had urge incontinence during my menopausal years, and I would be absolutely fine. I would say, okay, I have to go, and I would go. But as soon as I saw the toilet, I would go.
Oh wow. You didn't even make it to the toilet.
I could make it to the toilet, but no further. It was the sight of it. So I learned to walk in with my eyes closed, so I couldn't see it, and then I could have a successful toileting experience. So this is why I mentioned visualizations, because we can use, that's mind medicine, right?
Right.
We use the power of the mind. Like, I found for myself that if I think of like squeezing that sphincter, it doesn't work. It squeezes the bladder and squeezes it out. But if I think of, we've all had a little purse with strings that you pull the strings out and it makes it
tightens it up.
It tightens it up. So now I think out and it tightens it up. So what visualization works for you? I give a variety of different visualizations. Like some women think of a lock in a water course, and they have this like gate that comes down, right? And the water can build up behind it, but the gate doesn't get to be released until they decide to do that. So a variety of different images that we can use. And is incontinence connected to childbirth or other things? Not so far as we can tell.
Well, what about if you have your ovaries removed or your uterus removed, and that would precipitate?
Having the uterus removed, having a hysterectomy,
right,
can lead to incontinence because of the relationship of the uterus and the bladder. The uterus kind of keeps the bladder pressed forward, and when the uterus is gone, then the bladder can
fall down.
Yeah.
So to speak.
So to speak, exactly. However, other people say, well, there's that much less for the pelvic floor to hold up, so it ought to be better. And it varies from woman to woman. Now, we talked a little bit when we talked before about estrogen and various kinds of estrogen. And estrogen helps make those tissues stronger. But it's not just estradiol, it's the other 29 estrogens. But in order to make those estrogens, we have to have a very mineralized diet. And this is where our nourishing herbal infusions help us. They don't just mineralize the bones, they mineralize the muscles as well, and make those muscles work more effectively.
So, wait a minute. What herbal infusion would you use at this point?
For a woman who's dealing with incontinence, we were talking about comfrey leaf infusion.
Right.
Now, comfrey leaf is a controversial herb. There are some people who believe that comfrey leaf contains compounds that can be damaging to the liver. In a pretty thorough search of the literature, you cannot find very much in terms of science about this. We have a couple of neonatal deaths from women using comfrey root in very strong brews during the latter part of the pregnancy, and then the child's liver was not able to develop properly. And so there are actually 2 neonatal deaths in England. But I've personally been drinking comfrey leaf infusion at least a quart a week for over a quarter of a century. And so has my sweetheart. As a matter of fact, he really likes comfrey, and he'll often drink half a gallon or more a week. And he just, for something else, had a liver function test done. And the doctor said, well, you get all the stars there are. You got one of the best functioning livers I've ever seen. So I can tell you empirically, from myself and from my thousands of students, and I can also tell you that Henry Doubleday, Jr., in Bucking, Braintree, Essex, England, hybridized comfrey in order to get rid of these compounds. And that even though, if you buy comfrey, it says symphytum officinale, not for internal use, what's in that bag is really Symphytum aplantica, the one that is safe for internal use.
Whew!
Wow, huh? And again, you can hear me talking more about comfrey on YouTube.
All right, this is mind-boggling. I will definitely have to catch up on YouTube on all this stuff. So let's just continue on here.
Yeah.
You've got the bladder, you've got the uterus.
Mm-hmm.
What about dryness down there?
What about dryness down there, huh? Right. A woman came to me and said, when I got into menopause, it started to get really dry down there. And then, like after menopause, it was like a desert, she said. It was like sand dunes and camels. She said, and then I started reading New Menopausal Years, The Wise Woman Way. And, of course, I talk about oat straw down there, too. She said, and I started drinking that oat straw infusion. I measured out 1 ounce of oat straw by weight, put it in a quart jar, filled it at the top with boiling water, put a lid on it, let it steep overnight, strained it, refrigerated it, drank it throughout the day. She said, and you know what? Down there, it's now an oasis with date palms and dancing girls. So that's certainly one recommendation I have. The other recommendation that I have is 7 orgasms a week.
All right.
Whether you want them or not.
Oh.
You simply,
so 1 a day?
You could do 1 a day. You could do all 7 on Sunday. You could do 3 on Wednesday and 4 on Thursday. However it works out for you, 7 orgasms a week, because those orgasms bring blood to that area. And that blood then wakes up those tissues, and those tissues say, oh, we're supposed to be doing something, and that draws then the estrogens we are making to that area. So again, we're not just fixing the problem, right? Scientific tradition fixes, measures and fixes. The scientific tradition says your vagina is dry because you're not making estradiol. We will give you estradiol and a cream. You put it in your vagina and it'll work. And it does. And I talk about that in down there. And what are the risks of doing that? And they're not so great.
No, anytime you put any medication into your system that's from the pharmaceutical companies,
There are risks.
absolutely.
There are risks. It's not as great as taking it orally, however. And then the heroic tradition says, oh, no, actually, you're estrogen dominant, and that's why your vagina is dry, and you need progesterone. And you should use progesterone cream. Now, the Food and Drug Administration oversees food and drugs, but not cosmetics. So by selling a hormone cream as a cosmetic, there is no oversight and there are no laws.
Oh, interesting.
And the dose of progesterone in that cream is approximately 10 times the safe dose.
Whoa.
There have been very few actual studies done, but in one study that was done with progesterone cream in a controlled study, and women agreed then to uterine biopsies afterward, a third of the women had precancerous changes in their uterus from using progesterone cream. Basically, I think that the use of progesterone cream is one of the largest undocumented studies of hormones in women. And you know, down there, cancers can take 25, 30 years to grow.
Okay, so if I plan on dying at a certain point, I can
You
backtrack.
could do that, right?
Right.
But the wise woman tradition wants to nourish wholeness. So rather than fixing a problem by applying estrogen where we see it's lacking, or rather than cleansing or balancing, oh, you have too much of this, so we're going to balance it with that, the wise woman tradition says, let's nourish what's there. Let's drink our nourishing herbal infusions. Let's use oat straw, which unbinds bound testosterone. Now, it works for men as well as women. Well, it doesn't make them moist down there, but it does the appropriate thing for them down there as well. And remember, last time we talked about red clover being a fertility aid as well as an anti-cancer herb. And I often say to younger people, if you're going to drink oat straw one night and red clover the next night, send me the baby picture. We know about people who are sowing their oats, don't we? And people who are feeling their oats, too.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah. And then, of course, I talk about there are wonderful new products out, many of which are herbally based that you can find in your drugstore, and experiment with them. You may find some that are just the very thing for you, and it's easy because you just use it right at the time that you want it.
Versus having your 7 orgasms a week.
Versus having your 7, which is such hard work. An older woman said to me that the way that she kept herself moist was that she used capsules of acidophilus, which she inserted vaginally. And she says you do it at night because you produce so much fluid that you actually need to put a towel underneath you. And she was so dry she was actually bleeding when she was walking.
Wow.
And she found that if she did this once a week, she would kept herself moist and no problem of any kind.
Acidophilus is a culture that you usually find in yogurt.
That's right. And in healthy vaginas.
And healthy vaginas.
There it goes.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. So I was wondering if we could segue into the good news for boys and the good news for girls.
Absolutely.
The good news for boys is
Yeah.
that pizza helps prevent prostate cancer.
Whoa, wait a minute. So if you're going to eat pizza, does it have to be a certain kind of pizza with a certain kind of cheese? Because not all pizzas are made equal.
It's the tomato sauce. It's the cooked tomato sauce.
Oh.
And the more the tomato sauce is heated and cooked, the more cancer preventative it becomes.
Okay.
Now, if you really want to make that an anti-cancer pizza, ask for anchovies.
Anchovies.
Because anchovies are rich in omega-3 fatty acids, which help to reduce your cancer risk, especially breast cancer and prostate cancer. And if you really want to make that pizza anti-cancer, ask for extra garlic.
The garlic I know about.
Because you've heard the more garlic in the diet, the less cancer.
Right.
Right? And it works cold the next morning, too.
Oh, good, because I love cold pizza.
There you go. Now, I always hope that this good news for boys will make them so happy that they won't be too jealous when they hear the good news for women.
Well, let's hear it.
The clitoris never ages.
Wait a minute. You mean if you have lots of tomato sauce, anchovies, and garlic, it'll never age?
No.
Oh, okay.
I mean, you don't have to do anything. The clitoris is anti-senescent tissue. It does not age. Once your clitoris matures at puberty, that's it. It never gets older. You have at least the same orgasmic capability at 95 as you do at 15.
Oh, cool.
So we hope pizza's good enough for them, because the same cannot be said of their equipment, right? Their equipment ages. Their equipment very definitely ages. Ours does not. As a matter of fact, the clitoris was the most difficult thing to write about in Down There, The Wise Woman Way, because nothing ever goes wrong with it. So I wound up writing a whole chapter on how to have an orgasm, because, a fair percentage of women
don't know how.
Need to be shown how to have an orgasm. I've yet to meet a man, and if there is one out there, I'm happy to meet him, but I've yet to meet a man who hasn't figured it out all on his own how to have an orgasm.
Okay.
But it's not so obvious for women.
Do you want to share something?
Do we want to share? Oh, well, I go into graphic detail with pictures and everything, step by step, how to have an orgasm here in Down There, so that any woman who doesn't know can read this and know how to have an orgasm. Now, I was doing a book signing out on Long Island at this wonderful store, and this woman introduced me, and she said, I just want you to know I'm a multi-orgasmic woman. She said, but after I read this book, she said, I had such much more intense orgasms, and so many of them. She said, I didn't think it could get any better. But once you start reading this stuff and you really understand what's actually happening, because you see, most people think that the clitoris is just that little bit that they see, right?
Right.
But in fact, the erectile tissue in a woman is the same ounce for ounce, centimeter for centimeter, as a man's erectile tissue. It's just more dispersed.
Okay.
So this is why we have to have drawings, so that we can show you where all of this tissue is and how you can access it, and how you can access the pleasure possibility of the rest of your clitoris, the 70% you don't know about.
Well, I remember years ago they were talking about having an orgasm, and there was a part inside your vagina.
That's right.
And there's a spot that you can hit.
Yes, the anterior wall of the vagina is actually part of the clitoris.
Okay.
All right, and that's all erectile tissue. Now, in men, that erectile tissue is flooded with blood, and then when orgasm occurs, the blood leaves the tissue. There's little gates, and the gates snap shut and keep that tissue engorged, right. And then after orgasm, the gates open up and the tissue loses the engorgement. Women don't have gates. So as the tissue engorges, when there's an orgasm, it doesn't disengorge, it engorges more.
Oh.
This is one of the reasons for having 7 orgasms, because then you begin to realize, oh, there is something that happens after the first one that's very different. And many women look at me and say, really? I've always just stopped at 1. I say, go on. Explore the territory beyond that 1. See what could be awaiting you there. All right. So the good news for girls is your clitoris never ages. One of my students said to me, my 92-year-old mother asked me to buy her a vibrator. What should I do?
Buy her the vibrator.
I said, get her one that plugs in. Did you know that the vibrator was the 5th home appliance to become a standard in American homes?
No.
Indeed. The vibrator has a very interesting history there, and use of a vibrator is actually associated for both men and women with greater health altogether. So I was so excited when I started reading about vibrators and learning about all of this. Vibrators, in fact, began life as a cure for hysteria.
Hysteria?
Or moving womb, a disease prevalent among women with pent-up sexual energy. In fact, by the late 1800s in the United States, it was estimated that 3/4 of American women had hysteria. The cure? An orgasm, known by the prim medical term paroxysm, a prescription that in fact dates back to medical texts from the 1st century of the Common Era. Manual stimulation of the female patient to paroxysm was the cure, but it was, quote, time-consuming and tedious. Enter the vibrator. By the beginning of the 20th century, health spas offering vibration therapy for hysterical women had sprung up like multiple orgasms across the country. Once home treatment models were introduced, the vibrator became the 5th electric appliance, following the sewing machine, the fan, the tea kettle, and the toaster to become a household necessity. Hysteria was dropped from the American Psychiatric Association's list of recognized conditions in 1952. But vibrators continue to be vital to women's sexual health. Women who use vibrators experience more positive sexual functioning in terms of desire, arousal, lubrication, and orgasm.
And here's to 7 orgasms a week.
7 orgasms a week, whether you want them or not. And drink your own straw.
Susan, how is Down There different from your other books?
Well, let me start out by telling you how it's the same.
Okay.
And one of the ways that it's the same is that there's a voice in these books that speaks directly to us, and that voice is the voice of Grandmother Growth.
Grandmother Growth? Grandmother
Growth. And she sits us down and she says, here's what you got to pay attention to here. All right? So we were just talking about incontinence, right? So we go to the part about incontinence. And fire in your belly is good, my child, Grandmother Growth says. It can fuel your creative potential and get you going and heat up your desire to manifest. But fire in your bladder is not so good. And she did, right. And she then tells you about how you got that fire in your bladder and how you might get it out of your bladder. So Grandmother Growth is in Down There, and she's in my other books too. However, I treat some men's issues here. And so, but men said to me, well, you got to have Grandfather Growth too. So that's a new character who shows up and talks to the men about things. And he has such a different voice. It was quite amazing to me to be hearing what Grandfather Growth has to say. Now, each one of my books focuses on looking at what we can do through the lens of the 6 steps of healing. Do nothing, collect information, engage the energy, nourish and tonify, stimulate and sedate, use drugs, break and enter. And what I added to this book was little help boxes so that you don't just have this thorough thing, you also have a little right away you can get to it. And as I mentioned before, each organ gets to speak for itself, which was a wonderful, exciting thing to do. And then we had an art contest, and we asked people to send in art for each one of these organs.
Oh my goodness.
And then I had to sit there with these hundreds of entries and choose the art that best represented each organ. So very exciting to be able to put out such a really beautiful book. And these greens that we have here, this show is being taped in November, and these greens are growing right outside the studio door. There's a little vacant lot with a fence there, and this is lamb's quarters, which is a very potent green, excellent antioxidant, and the seeds are domestic quinoa. Right?
Really?
Yes, this is Chenopodium album, and quinoa is Chenopodium quinoa. And this, when I first walked past it in the dark, because it was dark when I arrived here, I thought that it was mugwort, also called cronewort, but I saw that it does not have the white hair on the back of the leaf, which is distinctive for that. It is, however, related to that, and it smells like Sweet Annie, which is,
lovely.
Isn't that a lovely plant? There's a big mass of it growing just outside your door here.
Well, we'll just have to go pick it when we leave.
And new anti-malarial drugs are being made from Sweet Annie, even as we speak.
Can you use this for an infusion?
You can't. Any herb that smells, you shouldn't use as an infusion.
Because?
Because those aromatic compounds, as volatile oils, can be harmful to the liver and the kidneys. That's why we usually use those herbs for teas. Like chamomile. I was harvesting some chamomile in Holland, and a woman came up to me and she said, "You don't look Dutch, and so I want you to know that if you brew that chamomile for more than 3 minutes, you'll wind up in the hospital."
Wow.
This was fresh chamomile I was picking, so it had all the volatile oils in it. The dried chamomile that we get, it's less likely you'll wind up in the hospital, but some people have occasionally left their chamomile overnight, and then in the morning they see kind of an oil slick on the surface of it, and they taste it, it's bitter, and they throw it away.
Oh.
So you would find your body would tell you not to do that.
Susan, in the closing moments of the show, what would you like to leave the audience with?
I want the audience to remember that herbal medicine is people's medicine. You know, we talk about, do we have a right to health care? Is there a right for health care? And it actually bothers me to see people who don't pay much attention to themselves, don't give themselves good food, don't give themselves, good quality of life. And whatever our situation, no matter how poor, we can offer ourselves a fairly good quality of life, and then expect medicine to fix them up when they get sick. And people who are taking care of themselves to foot the bill for that. I think that our real right to health care is what grows right outside our door. These plants. Herbal medicine is people's medicine, and we all have a right to this medicine. It's all right here. Nobody can ever take it away from us. What do you have to do to know how to use it? Learn about one plant. That's all. And it spreads from there. I offer you and all of our listeners green blessings.
Susan, I'm unbelievably thankful. Thank you. And thank you for joining us. What are you going to be doing for good health? An infusion and or 7 orgasms a week? Love to hear from you. Please write us here at The Woman's Connection. Bye now.